thank you so much for inviting me here and to talk to you today. I'm really passionate about this topic, as you'll see. I'm going to focus most of my talk today about getting the most from your research, but also from your mentoring experience. So feel free to stop and ask questions as I go along. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about my background and training. I'll tell you a little bit about my former and current mentees, and then finish off by talking about some mentoring pearls, ways that you can improve your overall research productivity, but I would say kind of methods of better engagement with your mentor. Okay, first I'm going to tell you about my background and training, but I'm going to do that because I'm going to make the case that your background and your experience really matters. As a mentee, as a student, and as a researcher, they shape who you are and how you respond to others. But they can also inform the research that you do, because your experiences, whether it was how you were born, where you grew up, the kind of work you did before you were coming to this institution, use those to inform your research, your questions that you're asking, or how you answer them. And I'm going to give you an example from my own experience, my own background. So I was born in Moscow, Russia. So the first thing that you probably won't know about me is that I'm Russian, because I don't have a Russian accent, as you would expect. But we left the country when I was 4 years old. But I grew up as an immigrant in West Hollywood around the Russian immigrant community. And so the ideals of immigrants and the experiences of immigrants is very central to who I am and central to my ability to understand and kind of empathize with other immigrants. So that's the first thing, and it can influence the kind of questions I ask, what immigrant populations may be concerned and worried about. And so that helps me with a deeper connection to all kinds of immigrant populations, because even if whether you're immigrating from Africa or China or Europe or Asia, there are certain things about the immigrant experience that are common, even if you're immigrating from a war-torn country or you're immigrating. There are certain things about getting to know the culture, learning the language that is common among all immigrant classes that that helps inform what I do, but can also help you think about it if you're an immigrant as well. We immigrated to Los Angeles when I was 5 years old in 1976, so you can quickly calculate my age, and that's okay. The reason why I put this up here is as a Jew immigrating from Russia in 1976, there was a huge, not huge, but a big movement in the United States to free Soviet Jews. This is before, this was before the fall of communism. Well, no, it wasn't that it was before the fall. The key was there was no religious freedom at the time that we left the country. And so the Jewish communities in the United States were very strongly working with the United Jewish Federation to bring immigrants into the US so they can practice their religion, they can experience religious freedom and tolerance. And so that was also a key aspect that became a core of my values and what I believe in, because my immigrant status, as well as my Judaism, focused on justice, freedom, independence, freedom of religion. And that also, over the years, served to influence the kinds of things that I think about in the research that I do. And this is actually a picture of the first apartment that we immigrated to. We were on financial aid that the United Jewish Federation, they helped my dad find a job, my mom find a job, get scholarships for me to go to school, and help us with our rent. Again, these are experiences that I look back on that help me think about and empathize with the different vulnerable populations that I study as I get older. Then I went to high school. I lived here in the West Hollywood area, and I went to high school up there. I was part of a legalized busing system at the LA Unified School District. It was the Van Nuys High School Math Science Magnet. My parents, being the stereotypical Russians, felt I should be very smart in math and science, and so they made sure to find me a public high school I could attend with accelerated math and science training. And so what they did in Los Angeles was, this was kind of a legalized busing. This was to get white kids from more affluent area into predominantly Hispanic or African American communities. And the way to attract those white kids was to offer math and science in less friendly communities. So we were being bused from West Hollywood into an area called Van Nuys, which at the time had Mexican gangs and Korean gangs that populated the surrounding areas, but it was a secure high school, and it was where we not only had a math science magnet in that high school, but we also had a performing arts magnet. And so what that meant was we had a very interesting high school body. I actually was able to find myself in my graduating class over here in the corner. And this high school might be familiar to you because Van Nuys High, the face of Van Nuys High has been prominently featured in a lot of movies over the, I think there's some TV show that actually features it right now that I'm not, or maybe, like, anyway, I know it featured in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and that was a popular movie when I was younger, but I think it's that Young Sheldon TV show. I think this is the location of this high school. It's filmed there too. So it's a popular high school, and we also, because it was part of Los Angeles, I think we had some famous people who graduated high school there too. So again, these were, and so you can't see it here, but the kids in my high school, I was in a high school where, again, they were doing this kind of legalized busing, trying to intermix people together. So in my science class, next to me was a 15-year-old young woman who was very pregnant and knitting a blanket for her future baby as we're learning honors biology. And so again, that high school experience, that kind of integration helped me learn about all kinds of different cultures that I would have never had the opportunity had I kind of stayed in my West Hollywood immigrant kind of community. And so again, that helped me to think about, empathize, and influence the kinds of things that I did in my future. Then I went on to do my undergrad at UCLA. This is where I got my BA in psychology and women's studies. I did what I have here featured. Let's see if I can use this arrow. This is the psychology department building. This is where I did my research as an undergrad. This is the psychiatry department building, and this is just like I added a really pretty view of the whole campus. But UCLA was a really awesome undergraduate training experience. As a psychology and women's studies undergrad, it was a wonderful liberal left-wing education that I'm very proud of, that encouraged me to think about feminist ideals, racial equality, and really kind of pulled together the experiences that I've had, the ideas that I was interested in, and gave me a purpose to think about scientific research as a form of political activism, not radically changing my data to necessarily force my agenda, but think about social problems and think about a scientifically sound solution to them, okay? Then I got my master's in experimental psychology at Cal State University, Northridge. I don't know if you're familiar with the years of things like that. This is what the campus looked like actually in 1993. It's a beautiful campus in Northridge, California, and this is what it looked like in 1993. In 1994, we had a significant earthquake, the Northridge quake, that really devastated the college campus. Look at how it made a big parking structure bend like a stick of butter. It destroyed that library that I featured. The Northridge quake actually is a misnomer because the other area that was really hard hit by that earthquake in 1994 was Santa Monica. Again, houses were completely moved off of foundations. My cousin and her boyfriend at the time were living in an apartment that where everything fell in on them, and they were lucky to survive and get out alive. But our libraries were destroyed. But I want to feature this. I don't know if you can see it very well on this screen, but so for my second year of my master's program from 1994 to 1995, our motto was Cal State Northridge stands, and we did all of our classes in trailers. So everywhere that we could, that the campus, so with very little notice, so this, I'm trying to remember when this happened. It kind of coincided with the time that I feel like we had a break, but with a very short amount of closure time between semesters, they were able to move all of these trailers onto the open parts of the campus. Everywhere that there was a field or something, they set up trailers, and we were back in school, taking our classes, teaching our classes within the next semester. And that kind of dealing with whatever is flung your way and making the best of it has also influenced me and into my thinking about facing adversity, dealing with it, moving on, and still getting to where you need to be. If that means sitting in a trailer instead of a pretty building, you do it because you want to get your degree and you keep on going. And I think, again, what I'm trying to kind of show you is every life experience that you've had is important. It shapes who you are, and it could shape your career and the kinds of questions you ask and how you engage with your science. Then my final training, and then also for most of my academic career to date, was at the University of Pittsburgh. So I moved to Pittsburgh to get my PhD in social psychology, and that's the building where I did that. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical epidemiology at the School of Medicine. And then I had a fellowship in health services research at the VA, which I completed in 2005. And then from 2006 to 2017, I was assistant and then associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. During that time, let me see, I tried to cut out some. So during that time, I went from doing social psychology research, which is really lab-based. Social psychology is focused on how the perceived or actual behavior of others influences the individual. And it was really interesting for me to study. I was really interested in psychology as an undergraduate in psychology. But what I learned in my PhD experience is social psychology is very lab-oriented. All of our studies were done with first-year kind of psychology students in a lab in the basement. And actually, that's what a lot of the traditional social psych research focuses on. It's just undergrad research with undergrads, really testing theory, isolating variables, testing hypotheses, but in very kind of lab-oriented environments. And it was not exactly the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I moved on into a postdoc fellowship, which was clinical epidemiology. I learned about I really liked epidemiology and the approach of learning or studying people and thinking about all the possible things that can influence their behavior and their outcomes. So we're talking about their environment, society, public policy, geography. And so epi was a really good fit with what I wanted, but that really strong, disciplined approach that I got in my PhD training in research design and methodology that I got from psychology still influenced the kind of studies that I do. Clinical epidemiology is the application of epidemiology in the clinical setting. So the majority of the research I do is really in the clinical setting in hospitals, studying patient populations, mostly related to kidney disease and organ transplantation and donation. And then when I moved on to my fellowship at the VA, what I was recruited there to do is we had a new center that was started between two universities, the University of Pittsburgh and Penn in Philadelphia. And they applied for a big grant to start a center for health equity research and promotion, which focused on all kinds of disparities in health equity issues and diseases in veteran populations. So and the fellowship that they had was a way to recruit new investigators, and it gave me protected time to develop pilot work and a career development award. You may be familiar, and if you're not, you should get familiar. This is my way of pressuring you to strive for challenging goals. Get familiar with the K01 grant funding opportunity for career development once you get your graduate degree. That's the NIH version. The VA had their own version. At the time, it was called an MREP. Now it's called a CDA, a Career Development Award. And it's a similar funding mechanism through the VA to fund VA investigators to do research with veterans within the VA funding trajectory. And then as an assistant and associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh, I had the benefit of being both a university investigator with access to NIH grant opportunities, but by maintaining my VA appointment, I could also access VA funding streams, which if you're only a university faculty, you don't get to access VA funding. So things to think about long-term. Taking opportunities to have more appointments also gives you opportunities to for more funding targets that might not be available to you if you kind of limit where you are. So along the way, what I wanted to show you was that this is a very long-winded way of saying that your background matters, and it's not only as something that you may see as something that you have to change about yourself, but see it as an opportunity to learn and think about the world in a unique way that no one else brings to the table except you, because no one else has had those experiences except for you. And those experiences matter, and they can be very valuable in shaping the work that you do. Okay, so then the three areas of research that I focus on now is health services research, disparities in healthcare, and quality improvement. And what's neat about health services research is it focuses on the patient, provider, and system level of analysis, and it also focuses on the healthcare system as well as the individual, and then everything in between. So we use data at the health policy level. We use large insurance databases. The VA has a wonderful infrastructure of electronic health record data that can be very useful. The work that I did at the VA was still primary data collection, interviewing patients about decision-making and health outcomes. But what's really nice is the health services research approach to studying things focuses not just on the patient and what the patient needs to change to have better health outcomes, but also on the provider, how the clinical providers behave in ways that may elicit certain behaviors from their patients, and also the healthcare system. So for me, health services research is really interesting because as an equity researcher, I think about how can we change healthcare delivery to meet the needs of vulnerable patients. Instead of yet another educational tool to teach that poor patient what they don't know about how to take better care of themselves, how can we change the healthcare system to instead meet the needs of the vulnerable patients where they are, whatever their level of knowledge or education is, and how can we help change our healthcare and how we deliver it and our own behavior as providers to meet the needs of the vulnerable patients wherever they are. And that, to me, is my own version of activism that's matured and changed over the years. So here's some of the former mentees I had. I've had the joy of working, when I was a graduate student, I mostly taught large undergrad classes, first as a TA and then as an instructor. So I taught intro psych, social psych, personality psych, all of the psychology classes. And then when I moved into my faculty position, because I was a PhD in a really MD environment, I wasn't able to teach medical classes because I'm not a clinician and I don't pretend to be. But what I did was I taught research design, research development, writing, healthcare disparities research, and I really had the opportunity to engage in really fulfilling, ongoing mentoring relationships with a variety of students at different levels of training. So everything from college students who were taking time off to do fellowship training or post-bac training, to medical students doing a year-long fellowship, to fellows who had already gone through medical school and residency and were doing advanced training. I had one in rheumatology, another one in pediatric nephrology, in cardiology, emergency medicine. Needless to say, I'm not a clinician. I know nothing about, well, I do now, but I didn't at the time when they came to talk to me. But what I did is I used my kind of disciplined background in research design and development and health equity research, because these were all students that the one thing they had in common is they were interested in studying disparities and equity in their area of expertise. So I learned about their clinical stuff. They taught me about their clinical things that they were experts in. And as a mentor, I could teach them about research design and development and how best to operationalize their variables and how to create testable hypotheses and how to write, how to do analyses and how to write good papers. And so that was what we did together. And so one of the things I'd argue about is that when you approach your mentors, you want to approach them in a really respectful and appreciative way, but also know that your mentors are learning from you just as much as you're learning from them. Their lessons are just different. These are my current mentees in my center. So I work with a wonderful biostatistician. I have a graduate student from the psych department, and then I have a postdoc fellow who just started with us in July. He's from Florida. He grew up in New Mexico, did a master's in public health with an EMT for a while, worked at the health department, and then went to Florida to do his PhD degree in epidemiology. And when he came back, he was looking for a postdoc opportunity. And even though he didn't necessarily know anything about kidney disease or transplantation, he had this amazing background, both as an EMT and in his work in the health department, because he worked with the different tribes around Albuquerque, and he had experience with the different tribes in Pueblos and doing the outreach that he did. So even though he thought his years as an EMT and his years kind of floundering, figuring out what he wanted to do was a detriment because he was a non-traditional student. He was older as he was finishing his PhD. As someone who was a director of a disparities center who was only 2 years in Albuquerque, someone who worked in the public health department, who had all this outreach experience with all the Native American and Pueblo tribes, he was like a godsend to me because he had all this really valuable real world experience that would just take out the 2 years that I was planning to get to know all the tribes and Pueblos, which I will still be doing, but now I have a connection to that world. So everything he thought when he was coming to me, he was going to have to explain why there was a delay in his schedule. I was like, are you kidding me? Your experience is going to be so valuable to who we are as a center and our mission to improve health equity in kidney disease in our community. And so I want you to think about those things too. Again, some of the learners that I've worked with, some of the students and trainees think that a non-traditional path or a detour on their path is a detriment. I see it as an asset because it allows you to think about your research questions and in a way that is very unique and will, if you use it right, can contribute to your research questions instead of detract from it. These are my faculty mentees, so I have the privilege of mentoring some junior faculty that are assistants and one associate professor. And again, they're coming from different areas. Kelly Chong is another one, an example of a professional who was out. She was an executive in a hospital. And she made it. She was making a ton of dough, and she was very happy in her life, but she was very frustrated in what she was seeing in the well-being of the patients that she served in an administrative capacity. So she actually decided to kind of sell her apartment, give up her fancy executive job, and go back to graduate school. And she went to graduate school at UCLA as an older returning student and got her PhD, and her focus was on quality of life measurement and measurement development and tracking within a hospital setting. And so I bring these examples up because these are all folks who had very different career paths in getting to where they are, but they're still doing really amazing, really relevant and important work in different areas of healthcare disparities. So I have a medical anthropologist who used to be a boutique hotel manager and then decided she was interested in anthropology. Jean actually followed a more traditional path. She went from undergrad to graduate school to postdoc and fellowship, but along the way, she got married and divorced and had an infant during graduate school, and she was faced with having to share custody with an ex-spouse across state line, and still seem to make a really successful go of focusing on economic epidemiology. Jamie also, she's an OB-GYN. She focuses on disparities in contraceptive use and women with high-risk pregnancies. Elizabeth Menes focuses on nutrition, and she's a professor in pediatrics and internal medicine. She works on nutrition in young people, but because she's interested in as a person who's nutritionist training, she works with both young people and adults. She's trained in both, but since her appointment is in pediatrics, most of her work focuses on nutritionist interventions and nutritionist training for pediatric high-risk populations, so vulnerable kids who don't have access necessarily to good, healthy fruits and vegetables and stuff. But because of her interest in nutrition and disparities, and because I was interested in doing an intervention, a diet and exercise and intervention in vulnerable patients post-transplant, we started collaborating together, and I've been helping to mentor her in her grant writing. Dolores Guest also, she's also a non-traditional student. She finished her degree in the more traditional kind of trajectory of when you go from undergrad to graduate and postdoctoral work, but her husband was a resident in emergency medicine, and they made the life decision that they had to move to where he got his residency. And so because her job was going to support them while he was in residency. If you know anything about residency, they make a very small amount of money a year, but they work a lot of hours. She kind of gave up her area of training and got a kind of a director of research development kind of job, where she facilitated other people's research projects, because that was the demand on her at the time, and that was the decision they made for their families. And then she's actually pregnant with her second child right now, and she is now an assistant professor, kind of later than the stereotypical trajectory might dictate, but she's had a lot of research experience, and right now we're working on how to help her write a career development award and explain that the time that she spent between the time she received her PhD and the time she's applying for career development wasn't time that she sat around twiddling her thumbs. She actually has a lot of valuable research training and experience, and again, it's a matter of how you explain it and you show it as a benefit instead of a detraction, and I'm sure she's on her way to a strong career development award too. So I put these pictures up here to show you that these are happy, successful, productive faculty members who didn't all have the kind of stereotyped traditional path of getting to where they are. As a way to encourage you, inspire you to not think about where you are now as the end of your potential training, I like to always challenge all of my mentees to think about what's your next step, what's your next hurdle. And when you're blessed enough to be in a university environment, you're actually always having the opportunity to learn and grow and change, even when you're in more senior position. And what I try to encourage my younger mentees, my more junior mentees to think about is, what is going to be your next step? Identify that goal, review the steps of getting there, and let's work on how you're going to get there. Let's not think about whatever happened in your past as a distraction. How are you going to turn that into a plus, and how are you going to use that to empower you to move forward to your next goal within reasonable kind of timeline, right? If you think that you want to make sure that you're realistic in your goals as well. If you have kind of lower GPA or lower scores, maybe you have to kind of revise exactly. Maybe that Harvard, PhD might not be your target, but within a reasonable framework, what do we need to do to get you to the next step? And always think about yourself that way. It's not what happened in my life pulled me away from what I want to do. No, what happened in my life, how I deal with what happened in my life, and where I go going forward is what's going to help me achieve my goals. So I want to spend the last section of my time with what I refer to as mentoring pearls. And the reason why I want to talk about these things is I think that these are things that, some of the things I learned along the way when I was a mentee, and these are some of the things that I expect of the mentees that I work with that help us have a really great relationship. So I'll go over each one of these at a time. The first thing is to seek multiple mentors. When I was an undergrad, I had one great mentor, and he was awesome, and he it was an older time, it took a lot longer for computers to run statistical analyses. We actually had to wheel from computer to computer to get our analyses done in a timely fashion. But he was so cool and publishing great papers in high impact journals, and I wanted to be just like that. But then as I went through my master's and graduate training, I realized not every mentor has my best interest necessarily in mind or can help me with all aspects of my career development. So the first thing I say is I want to encourage my mentees to seek multiple mentors. So seek a mentor that's substantive in the scientific content of what you're doing. That's important, that you work with someone who has expertise in the area you're studying, and if you don't, find someone who does. Colleague or peer mentors are really important too, both in terms of getting writing advice, if you have a presentation, if you have some slides you want to rehearse in front of them, having that colleague or peer mentor to bounce ideas off of would be great. A professional mentor, someone who helps you with your career development, with helping you think about what should be my next step, what should I wear to a conference, what shouldn't I wear to a conference, what is appropriate questions to ask, or inappropriate questions to ask. Those kinds of professional development issues matter, whether we like to admit it or not. I like to have external mentors, so mentors that are coming from other universities or other departments that help you kind of gauge the reality of what's happening in your own department or division. Like, is this how all graduate students are treated, no matter where they're going to go, whatever department they're in, or do we have a really strict faculty that are really mistreating their students, and it's time for me to find a different department to work in? That kind of reality check. I like having senior mentors with historical advice. As a new faculty member at UNM, I've only been there 2 years. The politics and interactions and culture of UNM is very different from the University of Pittsburgh. And so finding someone who could tell me about the history of the division or department I'm in, the history of the school that I'm in, is a really informative thing and may not necessarily be the same as the other kinds of mentors. Another thing I like to have to work with colleague or peer mentors, someone who's a year or two ahead of me. When you're a graduate student and you're about to have to work on your master's thesis or master's proposal, what's really nice is talking to someone who's already done their master proposal or is willing to share their thesis with you or give you some pointers about what they wish they had known or done differently when they were at that stage. So talking with your peer mentors that way is great. And then being a peer mentor for a first-year student when you're a second, third, or fourth-year student is also really helpful. And that relationship can be very fulfilling even when you're a student. And then the Jiminy Cricket mentor I love because it's someone who helps you think about ethical consideration. When you're doing research with human beings, ethics is very important. We have ethics training as faculty, as scientists, that we have to renew on an annual basis, and I take those things very seriously. Interacting with patients with different life experiences, different health conditions, we need to so respect where they are and where their life has brought them. And so those kinds of ethical considerations are important. But also ethical considerations, you can think about how to discuss authorship, how to discuss IRB issues, how to get out of a commitment that you promised in a positive, constructive way. These are all different kinds of ethical considerations that you're going to face during your student and your academic, your research, your science career, your professional career. So having someone who could give you advice, maybe they weren't there, but just someone you can bounce those ideas off of, and they would say, here's what I would do. You don't necessarily have to do the same thing, but you may want to think about this and this and this. Those are important things to have. And I would make the argument that all of these kinds of things are mentor relationships of one form or another. And no one is ever too old or senior to have these kinds of mentoring relationships. They're always often friends, we call them colleagues, whatever it is, but really what you're doing is you're engaging in a kind of mentorship. This is an important one. Respect your mentor's time. It's really important to have open communication about your expectations and your deadlines. I always like to ask my mentees what their goals are, what their timeline is, but I also share with them what my expectation is of those goals and timelines. I also agree on a lead time for every draft or review of something, whether I say I need it a week before or 2 days before. If they don't give it to me within that timeline, they should not expect me to give a response or feedback. I will not give last minute feedback on anything. And I make all of my mentees very aware of that. Some of them don't like it, they don't have to be my mentee. But if they are, they get really good, thorough feedback. Prepare a plan or agenda for every meeting that you have with your mentor. Even if there's one thing on the agenda, one thing you want to talk about, make sure you have something in mind to talk about with your mentor. Respect their time. I promise you, they have a ton of other things they can be doing during that half hour or hour they set aside for you. So respect that time and use it well. And if you don't have anything to discuss, cancel the meeting. Respect their time enough to know they could be doing 100 other things and say, you know what, I'm still really stuck with the draft that I'm working on. So rather than taking up your time, I'm going to work on it and free you up to do something else. And give them some notice when you cancel that. I always tell my mentees, some people like to work on evenings and weekends, and I do sometimes too, but I tell my mentees not to expect a response if they email me on an evening or a weekend, unless I specifically say, email me and have this draft to me by tonight so I can review it over the weekend or something like that. Everyone has a life. Everyone should have a life. They should have some free time, enjoy their friends, enjoy their family, enjoy their loved ones, and go out in the evening and weekend. That might not be the case every evening or weekend, but that means you respect the other person's life and don't expect a response. I say at least 24 hours, is a reasonable turnaround time. Establishing authorship protocol, I put that under the respecting mentors time. This can get you into some heavy water sometimes. So it's a tough conversation to have. I challenge all of my mentees to have it with me. I always say, have it with me because I'm a friendly audience before you have to have it with someone who's more difficult. Tell me where you want to be in the authorship list, and I'll tell you how much work you have to do to be at that authorship position. And then do it, and I'll support you, and I'll be happy for you to do it. But I think that can be a really tough conversation to have. And depending on how hostile a faculty member is that you're talking, trust me, I've worked with transplant surgeons. Some of them couldn't care less, and others want to be somewhere where they really don't deserve to be on the authorship list. But those are tough conversations to have, but you really should challenge yourself, push yourself beyond that comfort zone and practice having those conversations. And remember to say please and thank you. It's such an easy courtesy to have, and it goes such a long way to make you a memorable mentee if you remember to say please and thank you. I like to talk about this one, set reasonable but not low expectations. This cartoon shows the kid who says, I got a C, and I'm happy with that because I like to keep everyone's expectations low. Don't make it that low, right? Don't aim for low expectations, but set reasonable expectations. And that means knowing that there are going to be things that take longer, that will slow down your productivity. IRB approval letters take forever, and I always say just whatever time you think it's going to take, double it. If you have staff needs or volunteer needs, not only finding good staff, but going through HR process, no matter what university you are, always takes a long time. There's always more paperwork. And usually the requirements for that paperwork comes out in a trickle. And I think that's true for IRB, for all IRBs too. You submit your protocol to the IRB, they come back with comments, you address all their comments, you think you're great and done, and then they find new comments to review. Ones that they could have identified the first time around, ones that were issues there the first time around, they just didn't happen to notice them. So if you're working, again, if you're working with human subjects, IRB takes longer, hiring, HR takes longer. Participant recruitment also takes a long time. It's not just your energy level and how many hours you're committed to recruiting participants for your research. Sometimes they just don't show up, right? And sometimes, like for my case in the clinic where we're recruiting patients, if they no-show to the clinic, I can't recruit them for my study because they're not even there getting the healthcare they need, right? So recruitment can take a long time too. And all of these things slow down your ability to collect the data that you need for your research. Build that into your timeline and be reasonable with yourself. Don't punish yourself for things that are beyond your control, but don't just throw your hands up and say, oh yeah, I guess I'm not gonna do it anymore. Keep at it and keep working, but realize that it's gonna just take longer than you expect and plan accordingly. And then the last thing, be comfortable with rejection. Even to this day, even with however many publications or grants I have, I get way more no's than yeses. I get a lot more rejections than I do acceptances. You have to be, as a scientist, you have to be comfortable with that. And don't see a rejection as a rejection of you, who you are as a person. Just see it as a way that you just didn't explain what you were doing in a way that's understandable to the reader or reviewer. And it's on you to improve your science. That rejection is the scientific process, the peer review scientific process working. Because what it's doing is it's challenging you to make your writing better, to explain your science better, or to change your science in a way that's more scientifically rigorous or feasible. So see it again as a challenge to improving yourself instead of a rejection of who you are or your work. Time management, I think, is really important. I have a lot of mentees, students, and even junior faculty that I work with that don't schedule their time according to their priorities, right? Their priority may be writing a paper, it may be getting a grant, it may be better health, but instead they're working on some random project, or they're answering emails or doing something else that is detracting them from their priorities. So I really try to convince my mentees to write down what their priorities are, and if something that's asked of them is not in line with those priorities, say, I can't do it in a nice way, or say no in a nice way if it doesn't fit with your priorities. Unless it's something that your boss makes you do, right? Then that's out the door, right? And log your time on different tasks. This is a really great way of tracking whether the work that you're doing is in line with your priorities. Really write down everything you're doing in the day and how much time you're spending on it. Set yourself intermediate but firm deadlines. The example I used this morning was if you're going to be submitting an R01 grant for the June deadline or the February deadline, instead of giving that yourself as the goal, what you do is you break up the grant into your aims, your background, your methods, your analysis, and then your implications. And give yourself really strong, concrete deadlines for each of those. Like, I'll finish this part by the end of September, the next part by the end of October, and hold yourself to them and ramp up enough anxiety about that intermediate deadline as much as that final deadline, to push yourself to get to it. And then I like to tell folks to block off time for writing in small increments, rather than saying I'm going to use the next day or 2 weeks to crank out this whole grant. In your case, if it's between classes or between appointments or meetings, set aside an hour to get 45 minutes of writing done, whether that's writing something new from scratch or editing a paragraph or editing a paper. Setting aside a little bit of time, even every day, even if it's just 1 hour, gets you to a more productive end of the week than trying to kind of squeeze it all into a 24-hour session. And it also gives you a sense that you're getting something accomplished a little bit at a time, right? We talk about baby steps to your final goal. Eliminate guilt for taking a break. I work with a lot of type A people in medicine who feel very guilty if they take time off to go skiing or spend time with their family or whatever, but those are the things that keep you sane and make you functional and happy. So don't make yourself guilty over not doing enough work. Enjoy that break time and then get back to what you need to do. Hold yourself accountable to meet your deadlines. And I tell this more and more to people, turn off email notifications. This one is a really distractor for me. Right now you have visual cues to let you know when you have email, you have sound cues that when you know you have text or email, whatever people are using nowadays. And those answering emails can take up a huge chunk of your day when you didn't need to, when that wasn't your priority for the day. So what I've done, I've started to only check email certain times of the day, and then I just turn off Outlook altogether, or I just turn off the notifications and then just do the email on a certain set aside time. Receiving and responding to email messages can take over huge chunks of time before you know it. And then there's all those tangents. You can follow links and get on Facebook and all these other things that you can know. You guys are young, you know, Facebook, right? But my point is that there's all kinds of things that can distract you in your email and in the various social communication methods. So if you want to focus on your writing time, really turn off all those notifications just to make yourself concentrate on that time. I like to emphasize that self-promotion is good. It's not arrogance. You need to think about self-promotion as a time to share important information about your work with people who are otherwise really super busy. So if it's your mentor or your boss or your chair, those folks have a lot on their plate. And even though to you it's the most important thing in the world, they might not know about the fact that you got a paper accepted or that you got an abstract accepted for presentation. So make sure you share that information with the people who should know about it. Because again, it's not necessarily arrogance, it's sharing findings or sharing results with extremely busy people who have a lot on their plates too. And think about it that way instead of something that's self-promotion or self-aggrandizement. Be open to serendipitous opportunity, and there's a lot of times when you can have this kind of opportunity. Find a useful lesson from every activity, and I've kind of already shared this kind of idea with you. Everything in your history, everything you encounter, what is the lesson from it, and how can you use it in a positive way to either grow yourself or grow your research? That's the useful lesson from every activity. Eliminate rigidity in your research and career goals. If you're following a path where you think only this step and this step and this step is the only way I'm going to be successful, that's going to create a lot of strain on your mental well-being, potentially your physical well-being. Instead, kind of try to be more flexible. See a door closed as the opportunity to open another door and a way to take a path that may still get you to your goal, but through a different direction. And I think that's really important, and I tried to emphasize that to you with some of the faculty that I mentor. None of them had direct paths. Some of them look like they had really direct paths. They're all happy, successful faculty now, but they had different circuitous paths to get there. I did too in my own experience. And I think the point there is, if you stay rigid and you think your success is only by doing this one path, one after the other, it will lead to a lot of unnecessary tension in your life. So try to be more flexible. Use conferences not only to present your results, but as a really awesome time to network and engage in potential new research collaborations with folks that you might have otherwise never come across from all over the country often if you're going to national meetings. Those opportunities are awesome. And I shared the story this morning of a random comment from someone in a small clinical setting on my poster ended up turning into the seeds of an RO1 that is like successfully almost completed, and the ideas for another RO1 that's starting. And it was like a random comment during the social hour that we were having around posters. So you never know where an opportunity, a research idea, an awesome collaboration will happen. And so take advantage. If you have a mentor who's encouraging you to go to a conference, get past your shyness, get past your fear, go, because it's really awesome opportunity to network and think about new research opportunities. This one may or may not apply to you. I use this a lot for my clinical mentees, to listen to your patients. Folks that you're serving, the ones that you want to do the research on, instead of imposing your research ideas on them, listen to whoever you're working with, listen to what their needs and concerns are. Those are going to be the critical research ideas and solutions that would help them meeting their needs and goals in their life, and they will potentially be ones where if you're doing an intervention, which is a lot of my work, people are going to adhere to the things that they see as problems that they want a solution for, rather than the ones that you think they have a problem with and you're going to tell them the solution. So listen to what the people that you serve are saying are their main concerns, and those are the things that you can have the biggest impact on and find best rewarding with your research. Okay, my final slide, it's the motherly slide. Make time for sleep, diet, and recreation. So I can't tell you enough how much sleep, diet, and recreation is important to your overall well-being, but also your cognitive functioning and your productivity. I say this over and over again, when your belly is full of a lot of starch and processed foods, you're not going to think as well as when you've had some nice, healthy, energizing vegetables, fruits, healthy proteins, you know, whole grains. But getting enough sleep and having daily exercise is also really important. So exercise is important for good sleep functioning. It's better for your physical well-being, but it's also a great stress relief. So when I was in the throes of my dissertation with my extremely stressful PhD mentor, I started running laps like at 4 a.m. I don't suggest this to anyone, but running laps at our park near my apartment was really helpful for me to deal with an extremely stressful situation with an extremely stressful mentor. It also helps you sleep well, but it also helps your physical well-being. So one of the things that I encourage in my whole research team now is I'm not sure how it is here, but UNM has the Health Sciences Center and University have invested a lot more recently in employee and student wellness. And I encourage my team to take their lunch hour, whatever time they need to go and do a yoga class or go for a run or whatever they need to do to help them feel better, because when you feel better, you work and think better. And I think, and that time is never wasted if you're gonna exercise or work out or whatever you need to do to help you get your body in better conditioning, because that gets your mind in better functioning and that gets you more productive in your work. So all of these things I think are used, again, overall it's great for research productivity, it's great for your balance, and it helps you deal with the stressful no's that you're gonna get in your life, because in science there's gonna be a lot of no's. So I think that this kind of balance is really important. And schedule that into your time. Make this one of your priorities too, and make sure to schedule in all these things. And make yourself go to sleep at a reasonable time and wake up at a reasonable time, because especially the older you get, sleep is really necessary. And it helps your brain pull the pieces of the daily puzzle together. And sometimes you can wake up with really awesome solutions after a good night's sleep. So I can't emphasize enough how important that is. And I think, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Can I answer any questions?
I have no question, but first of all, thank you so much for your presentation.
Oh, sure, you're welcome.
Can you please, I know that your presentation is some part of your presentation is personal, but can you please send?
Oh, I'm happy to share all these slides. Oh, these are fine. Yeah.
I think I put them on the speaker website.
Yeah.
The speaker website.
So, yeah, make sure you, Dr. Myaskovsky.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Just
You can
Don't get me in trouble.
pictures off. I had a question.
Uh-huh.
So you mentioned, all this information that we provided, it's not only useful to students, but to really faculty, wherever, place in your career that you're in, there's always going to be a need for having a good mentor. So as a student or as a graduate student, how or what level would you recommend being a mentor for more junior student colleagues like undergraduate?
Yeah.
Is that something that we should focus on getting experience on, or should we really, kind of like in our early stage in our academic career, should we really just focus on being a mentor rather than?
Well, I think a lot of that, like everything else, you kind of have to balance your requirements with your desires. So in my graduate program, it was a requirement of all PhD students that if they weren't on someone's funded research project, that they teach. So every semester that I was there, I was either a TA or teaching my own course, and that was a requirement I just couldn't get away from. So I became a teacher mentor right there. And then I was saying on the multiple mentor slide that as a junior graduate student, you can seek your senior graduate student colleagues to get their advice on if they've already done their master's thesis proposal and you haven't. Ask them to share a copy, and then return the favor when you're older. Share a copy with them. That doesn't take much of your time. That's just sharing your document. Obviously, you want to make sure you're not plagiarizing from someone else or encouraging plagiarism in the junior person, but sharing it with them just to give them an idea of what they should be doing. That's a really helpful way of mentoring too, or sharing your CV with a more junior colleague. Or if they're an undergrad applying for graduate school, share with them your experience of applying for graduate school. What did you wish you knew when you were an undergrad to think about that you know now only as a graduate student and you just didn't know before? So those are opportunities, those are one-offs, those aren't long-term, huge time commitments, but those are really great mentoring opportunities to help out someone that are really fulfilling for you. I think for most people, they would be a fulfilling experience and are so valuable to more junior colleagues. Thank you for having me.